Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to our Facebook Live PSBTA Weekly Roundup. Today, we have on our panel to discuss the week's events, retired Assistant Sheriff Raymond Flynn, who is also one of our directors on the PSBTA board. And then, of course, we have the infamous Deputy Executive Director for the PSBTA, retired Police Chief Carl Wilmes as well. So what we like to do is get together on Fridays and talk a little bit about the events of the week, in particular what we were doing on our webinars. We had two webinars this week, one of which was central to some work that the PSSA is doing, specific to the 4.9 gigahertz spectrum that is being discussed right now by the FCC, and also a really interesting webinar on utilizing technology to mitigate in life-saving circumstances. So I'm going to start with you, Carl, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we saw yesterday. I thought it was an extraordinary webinar, really. As we're gearing up for these webinars, I get a little bit of a feeling for what these folks are going to say, but it isn't until we go live that I really get a grasp of the software that they're presenting. And I'd like to know what your take was on some of the stuff that we saw yesterday.
Boy, it was exciting stuff yesterday, wasn't it? General devices, talked about telemedicine, which I think is kind of cutting edge. They talked about vitals aware services, and we'll get back to that a little bit later on, because I think that's has a lot of potential for law enforcement, especially in light of where we are today. And then Pulse Point, which is obviously has to do with CPR and notifying people around you and those different kinds of things. And I know, Martha, you'll talk a little bit more about that from your perspective, because I'm on the police side. But I thought that Vitals Aware, I thought that that had some specific points to us, because, police officers today, it's still, I believe, the most honorable and noble profession out there. And I think that we ask our police officers to make those split-second decisions, and they always have to be right. There's no other profession that has to be right. And so this is just another tool, I think, that allows them to have that little bit of extra bit of officer safety. So I look at that application, and of course, it notifies both the police and the 911 centers of a possible medical condition, if somebody has Asperger's or has dementia or those different kinds of things. But it lets the officer know and be aware that maybe this is the situation. And so not only does it provide that umbrella of safety for the citizens, but it also provides that umbrella of safety for the officers, because we have to remember that the officers are going in there blind. I mean, they're getting a 911 call and they're responding to a situation. They have very, very little information. And so they have to triage the situation and make the best decision possible, not only for themselves, but for the citizens. Because again, their number one job is to keep the citizens safe. So I thought that had great potential for officer safety as we move forward. So all in all, I thought yesterday was just an incredible day.
Well, and officer safety, but back to the point that you made about not, clearly we're in a profession where making mistakes is a matter of life and death. And truly giving the officer that extra tool to make sure that they have those deep insights into why this individual might be acting peculiar, why this individual might lash out and act actually aggressive toward them, not knowing if there is a medical condition or a mental health issue. The officer can only go off of what they're seeing at the surface. And so those demonstrations that were given yesterday were so amazing. And Ray, I know you might not have been able to pop in because you had some stuff you were doing, but one of the interesting demonstrations that they gave was a young man who was just, no, it was the woman actually. The young man actually had his ear pods in and he didn't hear the officer speaking, and he also had some mental health issues. But then the other one that they actually deployed the software, the young lady, I think, was in her car. She was lost. The routes had been changed. And yet at the same time, there had been a party of teenagers that were released. So the officers were on alert looking for kids that were drinking. And of course, this young lady has a little bit of a deficit. And so when she innocently enough pulls over to ask for help, they immediately start assuming that she's got, she's been drinking. It wasn't until that other officer came up, his phone pinged, based on proximity to hers, that this was the case, that this young lady had these issues, and it was immediately able to mitigate. And the whole course of action changed on what those officers did based on those insights. And to me, it's just like having this little guardian angel sitting on your shoulder, being able to say, this isn't what it appears to be. So you may want to, take a step back and reevaluate how you're going to approach this individual. One last point that I thought was so incredible was when that third officer showed up that had the application, he got her name, because this is all volunteer information. Everybody puts that information into these applications as volunteer. They sign releases. So he even knew this young lady's name. So he could even de-escalate her anxiety and put her in a whole different place because he could call her by name. Now, to me, that is just unbelievable that we are going to have those types of capabilities at our fingertips, and of course clearly augmented with the advent of FirstNet, it being across a much more reliable network. But truly, as law enforcement, I think both of you should be like, this is truly incredible. This is a game changer for us.
Well, I'll jump in and say, intelligence and information makes you better judgment. And the more information that the officer can have about even prior to going to a call, let alone having that information when they're there, leads to better judgment. You made mention with the information they had, the one officer was able to de-escalate the situation.
Yeah.
What would have happened if they didn't have that information? And that's pretty much what we're all focused on now. The information is out there. It's how to collate it, how to analyze it, and how to transmit it. And that's where we're at. When you think about the smartphone only came out in 2007, and the amount of changes in our life in 13 years, can you only imagine what the next 13 years will be? I can't. I mean, I know it's going to be phenomenal. I know there's even going to be more information out there. And, groups like ours, we're there to make sure that there's going to be pipes big enough to transmit all the information that our first responders need.
Well, Ray, and to your point, I'm still holding out for the George Jetson flying car. Okay. I want to see it in my time.
I don't know. It might
I want one of those too.
I know it.
With lights and siren on it. Lights and siren on it.
Amen. Amen.
When I was
So,
at
Carl,
ICP, the last live one, Dubai had a flying hovercraft as a patrol vehicle that they had on display. I mean,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. Again, it's prototype, and they probably limited use, and it's probably in testing, but it exists. A flying hovercraft for policing. So,
well,
and, you see, like Uber wants to do flying taxis. So
right.
I think, Martha, we're all going to be around to see the Jetsons car. I really do.
I hope so. I really hope so.
The other thing, Martha, about that Vitals Aware app is that, around the country, everywhere you go around the country now, citizens and mayors and police chiefs are all talking about engaging the community. And then the next question is, well, how do we do that? How do we engage the community? How do we multitask? How do we co-respond? And this is an application that fits right into that.
Well, and I'm glad you said that, because that actually leads into the discussion I wanted to have about the pulse point. Because again, to me, having pulse point in many capacities, but particularly in notifying folks when somebody in proximity to them is having a cardiac episode, knowing where those AEDs are, knowing where those trained citizens are that could, go in and render CPR and immediate care before the first responders get there. All of these applications are not only going to help first responders with their own situational awareness and being able to respond the way that they need to, but they are truly force multipliers for a safer and more responsive community, which I completely think falls in line with what you just said there, Carl. And if I may, the telemedicine piece, where we're looking at really expanding what that telemedicine looks like. The discussion that we had online yesterday, Steve Devine and I in particular, was looking at how FirstNet is really going to augment that, in particular in our rural areas, but then also in those urban areas when the systems are being taxed, like if we have a mass casualty and those sorts of things, being able to stay deeply connected to your medical control personnel are going to take a lot of that stress off the law enforcement guys who are waiting for fire to get there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because on our best day, both police and fire, the average time is still 8 to 12 minutes. Again, depending on which study you read before help arrives. And usually the police are the first responders there, and so the first 4 minutes, as you know, in a medical situation, are the most critical for the patient. And so a lot of times, the officers on the scene just don't have all of that, not only technology, but knowledge for that immediate advanced cardiac life support. So those things are so important. And then when paramedics get on arrival, it used to be we'd call a helicopter and we'd wait and land the helicopter and then have the flight nurse help us out. Well, now with FirstNet and the technology, we can go right into the emergency room. Those paramedics can do incredible things. And you have emergency room doc right there. It's amazing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, the connection to your medical control personnel is going to be, I mean, I should just see it just exploding, much like Ray was talking about where are we going to go in the next 13 years and beyond, right? So clearly it's going to make things exponentially better for the citizens that we serve. So I want to go back, Ray, to something that you mentioned though. As these uses start to evolve and expand, talk a little bit about what the PSSA is doing with the 4.9 gigahertz spectrum that the FCC is talking about right now. Talk about where it sits right now and who it's been designated to, and then what our efforts are all about.
Okay. Well, the PSSA, for those that aren't up to speed on our jargon, is the Public Safety Spectrum Alliance. There's a group of folks, all experts in the industry of broadband, all having public safety background. And we've come together to put pressure on the FCC and make Congress and the White House aware that there is 50 megahertz of broadband that was set aside in 2002 for public safety by the FCC. And now the FCC has made hints, suggestions, a speech that they are thinking about auctioning off that spectrum to the private sector. I'm speaking for myself. I was shocked. Why would you do that? First, without consulting public safety beforehand. This was set aside, and the main reason it was set aside was the findings of the 911 Commission. This was set aside in 2002. There are several thousand agencies that are on it right now, nationwide, public safety agencies that are using it. And this spectrum can be used even more efficiently as 5G evolves. And we are coming together. We're lining up the other public safety associations that were together when we went after the D block, which ended up being FirstNet Authority.
Mm-hmm.
We're lining people up again to say, listen, this is public safety spectrum. We don't want to give it up. We need it. And not only that, we're going to need it more importantly as 5G evolves.
Well, and I think what's really important about what you just said there, Ray, is many folks from all tiers of public safety, a lot of, and of course I'm speaking from my own experience, depending on where you are in the organization, you go about your business and you utilize the tools that are afforded to you. But a lot of times, keeping your finger on the dynamics of some of these movement shifts, changes, the things that are happening at that federal government level, sometimes it's a little difficult to stay on top of it. So I think it's fair to say that what the PSSA is doing is really trying to rally the troops, and in the form of robust education and making sure that there's a clear understanding, not only that spectrum has already been designated for us, but that it isn't, it could be in jeopardy. And the voice of public safety could not be more critical than it is again right now, as it was, as you mentioned, with the D block. If we're not letting the folks that have these decisions in their hands know what it means to us, then what do they have to go on, right? So I really applaud where we're heading with the PSSA and trying to reach out again to the associations and just educate people. We want everyone to understand that we're not going to tell you how to think, but we're going to give you enough tools so that hopefully you will come to that conclusion that this is worth fighting for. And it is a very important aspect of where we're going to grow to in the future.
Yeah, I'm hoping on this endeavor that this will be more of an education. I don't know what went wrong in terms of wanting to auction it without asking public safety's opinion on it. To my knowledge, none of the major groups were contacted asking their opinion, whether they wanted to get rid of the spectrum. So I'm looking at it as an education. It's a different animal than when we created FirstNet. FirstNet, we were fighting private entities that wanted it for themselves. There were many people that thought we would never succeed. I'm also proud to say that it was the first time in history that police, fire, and EMS were 100% together on an issue. This issue was so important. We were so together. Even the police and sheriffs were getting along. Two different associations that sometimes have competing interests. So,
Absolutely.
we were, yeah. I mean, it's like cats and dogs are living together and they're loving each other. But I look at this one more of an education. And, the people that are involved are the utmost experts. And we want the spectrum to reside over with FirstNet. There's right now a federal agency that's been created that is staffed with on a board of both private and public safety officials, people that are trusted and known in both disciplines. There's a mechanism for the licensing already there, as well as all the backbone for the research and the implementation of the future. So we just want to keep what we have. We're not being greedy and asking for more. We want to keep what we have, and we want to utilize it even more efficiently and use as much of it as we can, as you talked about before with the apps. As we need to ensure that the pipe is as big as we can. We can never have an issue. I would never want to have an issue where our pipe is not big enough to transmit the information that paramedics need for telemedicine, that police officers need to live stream body cameras, that firefighters need to access building plans and remote devices on the firefighters in case they get trapped. We need to always have a pipe that's big enough. And this is about public safety. It's not about making money. It's not profit generated. This is all about public safety, and public safety affects all 330 million Americans. Boy, I get excited just talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, absolutely.
And it drives that technology.
They were
It just drives that
fantastic
technology.
points. Go ahead, Carl.
I says it just drives that technology, and that is the force multiplier for not only officer safety, which we talked about, or engagement in the community, for transparency, for all those things that are on the front page of every newspaper across the country right now. All of them depend on one thing: technology. And so this spectrum drives that technology, and it's just key that we have it.
And I just want to, I misspoke.
Oh,
I just want to correct myself. I made mention that the FCC was thinking of auctioning this. I don't have any knowledge of that. I do know that they want to open it up for commercial use, but they haven't said how they're going to do that.
So I want to talk about that, Ray, because this was a battle that was already fought when we were putting FirstNet together, and it was pretty clear that divvying up that bandwidth would only create a very similar patchwork quilt of which we were trying to overcome interoperability problems with in the first place. So talk about why it's so important to keep this aggregated and not divvy it out to a bunch of different licenses.
Okay. I'm not an engineer, so I'm going to explain it to you in layman's terms as I understand it. And I'm sure there'll be some engineers that are going to watch this, and please correct me and add comments. But by keeping a bandwidth together, using it for one purpose, prevents interference. That's the most important thing as I understand it. So you're not having like television stations or wireless conversations from private sector that are bleeding over or preventing the signal from going through. So that's the most important about having that. The second purpose is it makes it easier for the devices to communicate when all the bandwidth is close together. So now you're not getting into multi-band devices. They're out there, but we do know that a single band device is easier to make. It's less expensive. and tends to be more efficient. If I say any more, I'm going to get myself into trouble because I'm not an engineer.
Okay, but one other point that I think is worth making is when you've got a lot of people managing something like this, different interests, different agencies, different entities, I think the consistency in the ultimate outcome of priority and preemption could also be something that would be a little bit harder to rely on. So as everybody has their own idea of what that is and how it works and so on and so forth. So I think it's super important to keep it together, keep it under one umbrella so that those standards can be exercised and so first responders can rely on that priority and preemption to mean what it's come to mean on FirstNet as well. So
yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. The D block, which is what FirstNet has now, one of the purposes of the FirstNet Authority is to set standards,
yeah,
and also to test devices before they go on the network. So that's an excellent point you brought up. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Well, gentlemen, do you have anything else to talk about from the week or from our webinars? Because I think we've done a great job of covering the topics, and hopefully folks will go back over to our website and view some of these webinars as they've been archived. But is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I do. I want to say this as a founding member of the Public Safety Broadband Technology Association, and this is the first time I've been with you guys on Facebook Live. You guys, and I mean that for both Martha and Carl, have done a phenomenal job with the webinars. Not only do I enjoy watching them, I learn stuff, I validate stuff, I get to see what other movers and shakers in the industry, what their opinions are, but not only that, they are so professionally done. They're not boring. They're enlightening to watch. And you guys, if I could reach out, I'm going to give you a virtual pat on the back, both of you. Thank you so much for what you're doing, and you're really helping us move forward.
No, credit goes to Martha.
Right.
She does an excellent job. Excellent job. It's been an exciting week in technology, so thanks. It was a good week.
You know, one thing that with the news, I saw that the federal government has agreed to free up 100 megahertz from the military for wireless communications.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know what other hurdles they have to do. It was bandwidth that was reserved, having to do with radar defense, and I guess they figured out how they can free up some of that. So that's going to be another 100 megahertz that's going to go out into the public domain.
An ever-changing landscape, I would say.
We're going to need that bandwidth for your space rocket.
Right. How am I going to do my hands-free navigating in my George Jetson flying car if I don't have that bandwidth? So anyway, all right.
Don't forget you need Rosie the robot.
Yeah, of course, that does my laundry and makes dinner.
Exactly, Mark.
That's high priority list. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for the time. Again, we are the Public Safety Broadband Technology Association. Please visit our webpage at thepsbta.org. We have some additional webinars that are coming up in the future, and all of our webinars past have been archived and are there for you to view. And to Ray's point about learning something new with those webinars, I learn something new every week with these webinars, and it never ceases to amaze me where we are headed with the innovation for public safety. So strong work, everybody, and let's preserve that 4.9 spectrum.
Absolutely.
Have a good one, guys.
Safe.
Okay, bye-bye.